what has happened in the Trump speech at the in his speech, State of Union speech of Donald Trump. He mentioned a little bit about the foreign policy of the United States when it came to the war in Ukraine. He spent something like 10, 15 seconds, not more than that. With the case of Iran, a little bit more than a minute. And but all he was talking about, let's focus, because today, every you look at the news today, it's all about the war negotiations between Iran and the United States. The war is coming, and all of this sort of madness that is happening. What is your understanding? Because we've learned that more than 70% of the people in the United States, in various polls, show that they don't want a new war. And how is that going to influence? We know that if something happens, that would drastically influence the price of oil as well. What is your understanding of that, of the policies in the Middle East, in the West Asia?
Well, of course, people don't want war with Iran. One of the first things Iran would do would be to close the port of the Strait of Hormuz, and oil prices would go up. And I want to talk about how Trump got into this. Even before he began to speak, there was 10 minutes, and he's walking into the court, and he walks into Congress. At the very front, there are the Supreme Court justices, and he walked by. He didn't shake the hand of the Catholic justice that he had appointed. He was so angry at her because of the tariffs. So right away, that way he showed symbolically, what was happening. He said he loved tariffs, and I sort of hate to talk about what he said at the State of the Union speech because he didn't say anything. If I try to make sense of it, it's like talking about a swamp, and you try to say, how do you make sense of what's happening in this mass of free association? So I want to talk about what the aftermath is, because that's what they're talking about today. In the Wall Street Journal, for instance, the big news is about the Supreme Court ruling on the tariffs. And before the Supreme Court ruling, there was an expectation by many people that, of course, Trump's tariffs were illegal. This is why he spent so much time in his speech saying, I love tariffs. They're wonderful because they're really not, as we've discussed before. And the Supreme people expected the Supreme Court would turn it down. And in that case, the importers get to bring a lawsuit to get refunds for all of the tariffs. Well, now the price that speculative investors are buying these lawsuit cases for refunds have gone up, doubled from 20% of the original amount that they paid to 40%. And companies are being willing to sell it because if you're a small importer and you paid these fees, it's enormously expensive to hire a lawyer and have a trial and try to wait out and force all of this. And the hedge funds are willing to pay the legal costs of companies that file in order to get everything that they get over 40%. Well, legally, the only people who can get refunds for these tariffs are the importers that actually paid them. Well, this means that it's a bonanza for company for all of these companies, because as we've discussed before, 94% of the tariffs were just passed on to customers. That what Trump said was foreigners are going to pay. That was all wrong. It's the American consumers that have paid, not the importing companies, though. So there's sort of a something that seems unfair to a lot of people here. The companies are going to get reimbursed for tariffs payments that they simply passed on to the customers. So they're going to be getting a free lunch for all this. So of course they're willing to sell it. A free lunch is better than nothing. And now you have a number of the Democrats sort of grandstanding and making a proposal that for instance, Gavin Newsom of California and Pritzker of Illinois they're both presidential candidates for 2028, they've demanded checks for the families that have actually had to pay the higher prices that were all just added on. Well, there's no way that you can tell which families actually paid for higher prices for all of the individual things. It becomes a statistical morass, and it's almost impossible for any of these families to collect. But I think the Democrats are trying to pretend that look at how unfair it is. This is a huge. The way the law is written, it's a huge giveaway to the importers to give them reimbursement for a cost that they never had to bear, and it stuck the American people. Well, Trump made a big speech about, part of his speech was a statistical nonsense about how he's brought down prices for the population, and he cited the Consumer Price Index. And it's very interesting. He also pointed out that the single major price decline was in the price of oil. And that's when he said, drill, baby, drill. He said, I've thrown all my support between the oil companies and the drillers, and your gasoline prices have come down. He quoted all the price. All that's true. But the gas prices and electricity prices that have gone way up have played such a large role in the Consumer Price Index that people who are listening to the speech know that they've been paying more at the grocery stores. They've been paying a lot more for health care premiums that have almost doubled. And it's surprising to me that Trump didn't point out the one great price decline that he actually succeeded in. A year ago, when he came to office, he offered his supporters the Trump watch for $100,000. And he said, this is a real fancy thing. It's going to be a historical record. If you have a Trump watch, you'll be part of history. People bought it for suckers bought it for $100,000. The price now is only $5,000. There are no more suckers. Well, that's a 95% price decline, and he didn't even cite that in his State of the Union speech. So basically, he just sort of wandered. I think over 45 minutes was just calling on various people who'd been injured by illegal immigrants, attacking them. It was military people, Olympic hockey players, nothing at all about his policy. So it's very hard for me to say anything about the policy. And equally vacuous was the Democratic Party response by the CIA governor-elect Spanberger, who is a member of the right-wing Democratic sort of business council and other right-wing parts congresses within the Democratic Party. She didn't really say anything at all in favor of the people, just a lot of rhetoric. So this was probably the most vacuous State of the Union that there is, and I really can't talk about many of his other statements. You did say that he mentioned Iran, and of course he can't say very much about it because there's still negotiations going on, and we'll know by in New York time 1 p.m. today is when the meeting between the American negotiators, including Grossi, and the Iranians are taking place. And the rumor is that Iran has tried to offer Trump an opportunity for American oil companies to come into Iran and essentially be hired for some proportion of the oil wells they develop. I'm not sure how this can really develop into something, because I don't think anyone really trusts that oil or any other American foreign investment is going to be politically neutral. But at any rate, it's obvious that Trump couldn't really say anything about that. He couldn't promise peace, and he didn't really want to threaten war. So it was maybe you or Richard can make something out of this, but I think I said everything that I can.
Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, again, just to add, I don't know whether it was in today's Reuters or Wall Street Journal. I don't remember. I look at too many of these things in the morning. But there's a long story about it begins. There's a statistical discrepancy in Chinese statistics between one set of statistics about their exports to the United States. And remember, China is a major global exporter to the United States, and another one. And then the article explains what the difference is, and the difference only magnifies the chaos and the cacophony of the tariff proposals. I want to underscore that it was political theater. That's why Mr. Trump is in love with it. It lends itself to his portraying himself as the big tough guy. He doesn't have to negotiate with Congress about these tariffs. He doesn't have to negotiate with other countries. He can threaten them. And if they don't come across with a tribute payment promising to buy American this or that, or as Michael just said, letting American companies invest, or literally paying tribute, as von der Leyen agreed to do on behalf of Europe and so forth. He loves the role it allows him to play. But as a policy, it is incoherent. It is cuckoo. It is nonsense. And the Supreme Court has now had to say that if you take seriously the history of the Republican Party as the party against taxes, which has given the Republican Party its survival over the last 100 years. Against every tax, it's in favor of reducing or eliminating it. That's its position. And it appeals above all to the employer class of the United States, which doesn't want to pay taxes as a business and doesn't want to pay taxes as a wealthy individual. And so the tax cuts are for that. And Mr. Trump understands that. His first priority in his first presidency was the tax cut of December 2017. And his first priority in his second presidency was the big, beautiful tax that was passed in April of last year. So we know what his top priorities are. He has to do that to hold the base of the Republican Party financially, ideologically, and historically. But then you have a problem, you idiot, kind of looking at him in the face. If your program is to cut the American budget deficit by a tariff, well, that's a tax. So you are now the great Republican who is taxing. And even though you would say to the business community, I gave you a big tax cut in April, don't complain to me when I give you a tax cut, a tax increase with the tariff. I've already offset that with the tax cut I gave you before. But we have a capitalist class that is way too greedy to be satisfied with. They don't want a tax. They want the tax cut, big and beautiful, and they don't want a tariff. So he's got a problem. He doesn't know how to handle it. The Supreme Court helps him and hurts him all at the same time. But here's the story in the Wall Street Journal that adds. The discrepancy in the Chinese statistics is because an enormous, I'm talking 3/4 of the goods and services shipped by China to the United States escaped the tariff. They got around the tariff. And they're showing up, the goods all over the United States in warehouses filled with Chinese imports that paid no tariff because of one illegal maneuver after another. In other words, tariffs have the same problem that sanctions do. It's too easy to evade them. So now we have a bitterness among the American corporations who paid tariffs while their competitors didn't. And the competitor is therefore able to offer the Chinese commodity that has been brought in at a lower price, reaping a higher profit because they don't have a tariff to pay. Whereas their law abiding competitor, American company, is stuck. And by the way, that fuels the demand for a refund. And that will be a clever argument in Congress for the pro refunders, because they can now say they just want to level the playing field between the law abiding companies who paid the tariff versus the cheating companies who connived with the Chinese to get around it. This, this ought to elicit laughter. It is the American giant, wetting the bed, being unable to function anymore.
Richard, you just reminded me of something that Trump said. He said he would like all of the government budget to be tariffs and no income tax at all. Well, you talk about what's good for the capitalist class. That's the ideal. Yes. Tariffs are paid for mainly by the American consumers. It's like an excise tax on consumers. But the income tax is paid by the companies, the industrialists, the corporations. So in other words, he wants to ship taxes entirely off profits and earnings and rents of the big companies and put it entirely on the American people, except for corporations that have to pay the tariffs for steel and aluminum and all the other problems that we've said. So what he dreams of is having a huge tax shift off his campaign contributors, off the public who don't really have any influence over him. So, and just as Nima said, the public doesn't want a war with Iran, but where are they on the range of contributors to Trump's political campaign? And how many Trump watches did they buy?
Listen, the only major American tax that is still progressive, in other words, where you pay a higher percentage the richer you are, is the income tax.
Yeah.
So he is going to get rid of the only remaining progressive tax and replace it with something that is the equivalent of a sales tax. Whatever the tariff is, Rockefeller pays that amount, and so does Rockefeller's secretary. In other words, your income has no relationship to what it is you're having to pay here. So it's the dream of the capitalists and of the rich that the income tax imposed on them early in the 20th century will be gotten rid of early in the 21st century. They will have suffered it for it took them a century to get rid of this one progressive effort. You put that together with the fact that in 2026, we've reached a new threshold. You can leave in your estate up to $15 million per person or $30 million per couple before any estate tax enters the picture. All right. These are the two steps absolutely guaranteeing what already exists, which is a perpetual class of the super rich who can make sure that their children will continue to occupy pretty much the same position as they do, to get rid of whatever little bit of democratic anything was woven in to the tax structure before. And by making that remark, Mr. Trump makes sure we all understand what the historical process is that's going on here and how he is committed to seeing it through to that end. He won't be able to do that, but he'll try and he'll move the needle a little bit further. On the Iran thing, if I could say a word about that. I think we need to have a historical perspective on this, a little different from what we're hearing. Take a look at the major wars that the United States has fought since the Second World War. The war in Korea, the war in Vietnam, the war in Afghanistan, and the war in Iraq. Okay, those were the four major wars the United States was engaged in. And it pitted the United States, at that time, the richest country in the world, the most militarily developed country in the world, against four of the poorest countries on this planet: Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And the United States had a difficult time in every one of them. It fought to a stalemate, a kind of a cutting Korea north and south. That was the end of the Korean War. It lost in Vietnam, which is now run by the Communist Party of North Vietnam. It lost in Afghanistan, run by the Taliban. And it basically lost in Iraq, too. It's a little harder to identify who the winner there is, but that the United States is not among them is pretty clear. Okay, Iran is not like that. Iran is a much bigger country. Iran is a much richer country. Iran is more industrially developed. Iran has much more of a military. Iran has a long border with Russia and has a close alliance with Russia and China. This is a different, no wonder General Kane gives advice to Mr. Trump. Let me underscore that Mr. Kane gives advice to Mr. Trump is neither interesting nor relevant. That we are all told about this advice, that's interesting. It is important for people, apparently, to get out the message that the military and the CIA are not so clear how this is going to work and how well this is going to go. And that's the real problem for Mr. Trump. Because if you add up Epstein and then you add the tariff disaster, and now he has a war he loses, the elections are over. He will either have to prevent those elections or he will be removed from power by them.